trustees and administrators and community members, we're back. And so now we are reconvened in open session, and do we have any action on our closed session items? Mr. Burdine.
Yes, Madam President. I move that the Board of Trustees accept the hearing officer's recommendation concerning the Level 3 employee grievance appeal of Rochelle Lang.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Burdine and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Motion passes unanimously. Do we have any additional motions? Mrs. Tossan.
Yes. I move that the board approve and authorize the superintendent to execute the settlement agreement and release of claims in NF by next friend Ryan F. and Jody F. versus Fort Bend Independent School District, TEA docket number 202-SE-0414 as presented.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion by Mrs. Tossan and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. The motion passes. Do we have another motion? Mr. George.
Yes, ma'am. I move to propose termination of Nasreen Alba's term employment contract during 2014-15 school year and to authorize superintendent or his designee to notify Ms. Albas of this action in accordance with applicable law and policy.
Thank you. We need a second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. We have a motion by Mr. George and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have any discussion? Please vote. The motion passes. Mr. George?
Yes, I move to propose suspension without pay pending discharge of Nasreen Alba's term employment contract and authorize the superintendent or his designee to notify Ms. Albas of this action in accordance with applicable law and policy.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. George and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Please vote. Motion passes. Thank you very much. That concludes our closed session items, so we're ready to move now to the consent agenda. Do we have any items that we'd like to remove from the consent agenda? All right, then may I have a motion to accept the consent agenda as
Madam
proposed?
President, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented. Second.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal for agenda items A through J on the consent agenda. Do we have any discussion? I'd just like to comment that on the class size waivers, thank you so much to those of you working on that we have such a small number. And I noticed that when I looked at the list, there are a lot of classes in the kinder and first age group, and that is tough to manage those kids when they're new to school and small, and then there's a lot of them on top of that. So I know you're very mindful of those situations, and I hope that we have aides where they're needed and we provide the resources we need for those classroom teachers. Any other discussion? All right, very well then, please let's vote. Very well, the motion passes. Now we're on to the action items, which are, the first one is with regard to the feeder pattern and boundary planning and the community engagement contract with Dijon Richter. Do we have a motion?
Madam President, I move to approve action item 12A as presented. Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal. Do we have discussion? Dr. Dupree, I believe we have some information to be.
Yes, ma'am. We wanted to provide an update. Beth Martinez is going to help with that this evening. Based on the board's discussion at the workshop last week, we have substantially modified the timeline and kind of adjusted the overall proposal and gotten a new proposal. So Beth's going to bring us up to date on that.
And thank you for listening to what we said and then adjusting accordingly. We appreciate that very much.
Right, good evening. I want to give you kind of a high-level overview of some of the changes that I'll go into at a little bit deeper level with you this evening. First of all, you see before you the revised timeline, and this reflects the addition of academic programs and pathways. It also incorporates a shorter timeline for the feeder pattern study, beginning with the proof of concept and the work that was completed last year by the steering committee. And then, of course, the boundaries that need to be reviewed and drawn for elementary school 46 and 47, and any other boundaries, beginning with a review of what was proposed or put forward within the facilities master plan and identifying the pressing needs moving forward. You will note as you drill down to the timeline there, the academic programs and pathways planning that has already started in September with quite a bit of work in the academic area. And I know Dr. Wickbeck has been working with a group and touring and assessing and reviewing and analyzing enrollment, projected enrollment, programs, facilities, actually going out and touring the facilities for all programs across the board, those that are within the CTE area, as well as those academic programs, special programs, and special ed, to provide a comprehensive assessment looking into all of the programs, and then moving forward in October with a review session or a work session with the district administrative team, quite similar to the process we reviewed last week for feeder pattern and boundary, and then drawing up options around the programming to take to the community in November. Get input from the community on those program options, and then meeting with you all as a board prior to that. I want to make a point to let you know that what we have scheduled, or what we will work to finalize within the schedule, is bringing to the board information for the board's input before moving forward for community input, so that all along the way through all three of these phases, we will be interacting in that way each month to get input and direction from you as a board. Then taking that to the community with the end goal of December being when the recommendations will be brought forward to the board for academic program planning. Then the boundaries. You see, we follow the similar timeline on the boundaries, beginning with elementary school 46 and 47, reaching out to those campuses that will be impacted by those schools, establishing the small committees that will then work with the district administrative team for input and providing options to the community to go back and forth with the community input through the community dialogue process. Identifying, going back and reviewing the facilities master plan and identifying those areas that may also need to be analyzed and to be planned for a boundary change. In conjunction with, and we talked through this a little bit last week with the feeder pattern, is that they are related, because as we work through that feeder pattern process, if there are boundary changes or changes to any of the zones based on what was done previously with the facilities plan, or because of the feeder pattern, then we would move in and out of that similar process with the boundaries and establishing those local groups and meeting with them, taking information to the community as an outcome of the feeder pattern process. So that drives me down to the feeder pattern process, and you'll notice a shift in that timeline. If you will recall, last week we talked about in April, going to the board in April for your recommending approval of the feeder pattern, and we have tightened that significantly, beginning with that proof of concept work, and then working with DeJong Richter. In September and October, there is still a need, or there is a need, to go back and review all of the data. And so while we have that GIS data from last year, when we were doing the work at that time with the facilities plan and the steering committee, the students need to be geocoded again, or that needs to be reviewed to make sure that the students, wherever they were last year at that time, did they matriculate to the next grade level? Are they still in the same attendance zone? Did they move to another campus? Did they leave our district altogether? Are there some programming changes? Are there students in an ESL program, for example, that weren't before? And so it's going back and reviewing the data and then making adjustments based on where we are today. What is our enrollment? Where are those students? And does that match up? So that's quite a bit of work that couldn't start or can't start. It's pending board approval on this entire process. And so there's some lead time on that we will need to work with DeJong Richter to make sure that everything is accurate, and then begin looking at those feeder patterns at proof of concept. And is it still based on that data? Are we still where we think we were with that proof of concept? And then moving forward, if there were any adjustments that need to be made, of course, informing the board and getting input from you all, and then moving out to the community through that community dialogue process in order to then draft those recommendations, with the goal being January, coming back to the board. And I will tell you that we have, all of that said, we are positioned to be able to take to the community a look at the feeder pattern framework in October. And so that's just really days away when you count all the work days that we have between now and the beginning of November. So quite a bit of work to do, quite a bit of exciting work to do, and quite a bit of enthusiasm, I know, in the community about providing that input and seeing where we are going from here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Martinez. Do we have any discussion or questions? Mrs. Toussaint.
So thank you very much for doing that. First of all, thanks to administration for going back and looking at that timeline again. I know that we all appreciate that based on our comments at the board workshop. I do have a couple of follow-up questions. So you said the geocoding, we needed to go back and review the data, make sure kids are still where they were last year when we collected this data, and then make adjustments. So, but I'm a little bit confused how that has to do with feeder patterns versus boundaries. Because in my mind, the feeder patterns are just keeping the cohorts together, right? Whereas the boundaries have more to do with where the kids are, where they're coming from, neighborhood type things. So can you explain that?
Yes, and that is accurate. One thing I do want to add is that the geocoding of all the new students has to occur as well. So it's just a piece of that. But in looking at the feeder pattern, analyzing that information, that is a component of it, is has there been rapid growth in an area that wasn't expected? Has there been a decline where there wasn't? And so we'll sit with that data and look at the lines, the feeder pattern lines, and does that make the most sense in terms of everything you've set forward in FC Local, keeping the neighborhoods together and that sort of thing, and also with the numbers? What are we looking at in terms of where the students live and where the schools are located?
Okay. I will say with regard to that, I still have a strong preference of wanting to see the feeder patterns move faster and perhaps not simultaneously with boundary studies. I said this last time, that I feel like that boundaries are going to depend on where we come out in the feeder pattern optimization, the final plan that we get. So I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around. I looked through this and I still see a lot of it going on simultaneously, and I just really feel like that the boundaries are going to depend on the feeder patterns and how that comes out. So
I think what I would interject to kind of, I guess, to further what Beth mentioned is that they really do they're so interdependent upon each other. For example, if we were to go in without consideration of enrollment in any of our schools and just align the feeder patterns, you could potentially end up needing to draw one boundary so large that like an elementary couldn't accommodate it. And so it's almost like you've got to work both of them toward the finish line, just kind of work them both. And I think that's why we're pleased to kind of present a simultaneous plan, because they're so interdependent upon one another, because you can't you could theoretically just say, here's the feeder pattern, but then you end up saying, well, what if we take this neighborhood? Well, then, no, we can only take half of this neighborhood, because the other elementary that would have served this half is over in this feeder pattern, and if part of our goal is to keep communities together, then I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's just that the interdependence of the work We just feel like you've really got to do them closer to alignment.
So that makes sense, I get that, but then maybe I'm confused about what work we're going to do, because it was my understanding that the feeder pattern work was going to be done across the district,
Yes.
whereas the boundary work is going to be done only with regard to certain areas, 46, 47, and then whatever other areas we decide need to be done. So I guess that makes less sense to me when I start thinking about that, because no matter what, we're going to take a holistic approach to feeder patterns. Whereas boundaries are only going to address the smaller portion of the district. So I could see if maybe we were working on the, the same area with regard to feeder patterns and boundaries, but I mean, really, we're going to be doing the feeder pattern approach across the entire district anyway, and that's going to affect what work we do next year, potentially on other boundaries or whenever it is we decide to take that up. So does that make sense?
And I think what he's trying to say is that yes, we are going to look at that, but then, and that's where it seems that, looking at this timeline, that that's going to start right away, and we've already seen the draft of it. But the numbers make a big difference to making the feeder pattern situation work. So we have to have the numbers in order to finalize the feeder patterns, or in order to work out the feeder patterns.
So, yeah, I understand that, and getting the numbers in place, but we're talking about bringing something to the community in October, which means we're going to have gotten the numbers in place, correct, in order to roll something out to the community with regard to feeder patterns. So it just is not.
And then there's an update, right? Then there's another update of the numbers in December. So the first round is going to be presumably the numbers we already have, and then numbers that we know exist in schools.
So when are we looking at data?
That's how I'm understanding.
What's that?
When are we looking at data? When are we looking at the
We're using what we have now to get through December, and then we're going to get our new updated data from PASA in December. So then, over winter break and into January, just as we finalize to come to the board in January, we'll then do one final scrub and make sure everything checks out.
So we're actually going to do the work so we're actually going to look at feeder patterns prior to having the data that we,
The most
New
up to
data.
date. I mean, because really, and until we get to December, all we have is what we have, what we used for last year. But it just needs to be refreshed and all the new students added for this year.
so what if we have a drastic change in data in December?
Then we work overtime.
That's
have-
that's pretty much it. We'll be doing that anyway. But last year, what we found because remember last year we did for the steering committee that when we got the data, and there weren't dramatic
Right, I
differences. I
remember
can't
that.
imagine, everything we're doing now is based on PASA's work, so this will be our second year. We don't imagine a dramatic swing.
Okay, do we have Mr. Rosenthal?
I actually agree with the proposal here, and I do think that we're going to find that boundaries and feeder patterns overlap, and in some cases, I think we're going to find different cases throughout the district, but I can see how some feeder patterns are going to cause, or have the potential to cause drastic boundary changes. Kind of like Mrs. Bailey and I discussed, I'm not going to mention schools or areas or anything because it leads to rumors. But we discussed a specific example, and then all of a sudden when you start looking, if you do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this, and then you got a boundary change. So I think they really do work hand in hand. I think some of them probably don't. But with what we have going across all the district, we're bound to find situations where just a feeder pattern change is going to cause a boundary change. So, so I think you have to kind of work that, in your head at the same time.
Any comments, questions down here at the end of the... Mrs. Bailey, your green light is on. Would you like to speak?
Sure, why not? It's what I'm here. It's what I get paid for.
That's why you have your red suit on tonight?
That's right. Okay, couple questions. I want to start out with the local committees that are going to be formed of 7 to 10 people. Not insulting, I want to say we've learned from the past. And the Building Utilization Committee was a total disaster. And I would really like to see the process we're going to go through with these local committees. I stated last Monday, I really value community engagement. I feel like the local committees are another layer to this process. And again, the selection of these 7 to 10 people could hinder or kind of break up that dialogue. So I would like to see that, how you're going to select it. Because at this point, I feel we've had a committee, and it's just time to move on. So that's one question. I don't know if you've thought it out and you want to answer it tonight, but that's just one of my questions. I don't know how anybody else feels. I'm committed out. I'm ready to move on. I stated this last week. I thank you for listening and coming up with the timeline. I'm trying to work with y'all here. But I have to think of what the end in mind for this community right now. What do we want? And I would like to see a district-wide final recommendation early next year. I don't want to wait for 2015-16. This is just dragging on the process way too long. Okay, that's just my opinion. I want to, ditto Mr. Rosenthal's thoughts. Boundary drawing and feeder patterns go hand in hand. They are the same thing. And I don't know where we got off track that feeder patterns and boundary drawing do not go together. So in that light, I feel like our feeder pattern boundary drawing is getting duplicated with Dijon Richter. Seems like they're over here doing feeder patterns, then they're over here doing boundaries. And we're kind of duplicating the process. So again, the process is critical to me. And if we don't get this right, if we don't do our community dialogue readings right, if we don't come to something by March next year, I just feel, never passed go, never collected my $200, go on. And then I guess my last comment would be just one, would the meeting with Dijon Richter, if we go to approve this, take place? But again, those are my local committee, how is it formed? I'm really committee wearied out. We have enough to go on, started by the steering committee. I would just like to see the district-wide recommendations early next year. We're having too many rumors going on in the community right now, and it's just going to keep continuing until it's going to go on to next year and the year after that. And how long do we want to pay Dijon Richter? So those are my comments.
Ms. Martinez, do you have some comments or thoughts about her concerns?
Yes. I do want to say about the local committee, it's actually a local committee from each of the impacted schools. So a 7 to 10 member committee from each one of the schools identified to impact the rezoning in response to elementary school 46 and elementary school 47. And that's to provide those communities input and work. They'll be part of the work process along the way, not solely input only, but part of the work process. Here's the numbers, here's what we're looking at, here are the boundaries as they stand now, here are the neighborhoods that are impacted, and doing that work alongside of us as a voice of the community, alongside with the district administrators.
I guess I don't agree with that. I think it's the district who puts those options together to vent with the community. Again, if you get 7 to 10 people from area 46 and 47, I feel it's going to make the process go longer. I mean, present them with options. I don't know what's difficult about this. Present them with options, get their feedback. Let's go to 80% buy-in. I mean, the community wants to be heard. They don't want a survey to fill out. They don't want a questionnaire to fill out. They want to be heard. And that's how I feel.
I'm kind of leaning that way. Can we accomplish the same thing by taking some of the recommendations, knowing some of the things that we know about, land issues out there, and instead of taking that step to form these little committees, just going right to a community dialogue, here's our plan, and actually have, allow for dialogue at those meetings, so if you have to, it has to go a few hours, whatever, and then get the feedback, and then be done with it.
Yeah, we're approving over $200,000 tonight for DeJean Richter. And I feel like we're duplicating it. It's nothing against them. But I think it's time, we've heard from the community once, we probably need to hear from them again, but I really am worried about it through a committee, through a survey, through a questionnaire. I think these people need to speak and not be spoke to.
Well, let me address that a little bit, because I think, we have a plan, and we've eliminated the district-level committee, and we've recommended it this way for a reason, because I do believe it's best to get a smaller group of folks who know their community well, because when you can engage them in a several-hour meeting with options and maps, and they can discuss the intricacies of their community, the things they know that we don't know, their views, their perspectives, and there's a representation, then it's a productive dialogue. The minute we go out to a large group at a school and you have 100 people or 200 people there and just allow people to speak into the microphone, that's not a productive dialogue. That's why we went the way we did last year, where we allowed folks to do the surveys, talk, and have a dialogue with people around their table. Because that's how we got better information through that process than by simply saying, we're having a microphone, give us your opinion. Because then all you hear are the people who are willing to stand at the microphone and speak, and you don't get the perspectives of those who are not willing to stand up. Whereas when you do dialogues of 8 to 10 people with lots of all the facts and all the information that's been presented, then you get more balanced perspective. But the voice then comes from the 7 to 10 people from that school who are known leaders, who are active, who know their community.
Again, you're going to go back to the process of selecting the members who may bring some biases in. And again, okay, we're talking 46, 47 right now. I think community's looking at all campuses right now. So we could have 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 16. How many committees are we going to have? Because the feeder patterns change, and then the boundaries change. So, okay, we might not be talking 10 people, we might be talking 200. I mean, when does this process end? And I'm telling you, I've seen the process work. It worked in Fulton County in Georgia. And surveys and stuff can be written to be leading. Questionnaires can do the same thing. And that's why I say open. When I say open dialogue, it's a question and answer thing. It's not one-sided, two-sided. And another reason why I say about the committees, we can do committees all the time. We've done it in the past. It still doesn't stop the community from showing up at the board meeting the night of the vote. Who said, oh no, we weren't heard. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm uncomfortable with the local committee.
So, Mrs. Bailey, how do you feel about the suggested plan on the feeder pattern planning? The way it's set up, I guess, to have the administrative team present options, and then it goes straight to the community dialogue meetings, and then I guess the district reviews those options.
I just think...
Is that a better
I just think we have feeder recommendations already. Mm-hmm. We start with those. Mm-hmm. We already know that's going to impact zoning. It's going to affect boundary changes. You can't have a dialogue on feeder patterns without having a dialogue on boundaries.
Right, and these things are going on simultaneously, so, but this process and the lower bar, do you feel comfortable with that process?
I am comfortable with, yes, the district drawing the boundaries.
Okay.
That's the way it should be. The district should draw the boundaries, and they may have several options to draw those boundaries, and then you bring it to the community that is impacted by those changes. So if we're dealing with 46 and 47, I'm not as familiar with 46, but I know that area is growing like crazy. 47, we all know. I don't see those boundaries being that hard to draw, but when you start to look at the whole district, and none of us have been here, I don't know if Jim was here doing the boundary process when we opened a new school and what was done back then, but it seemed to have worked real well. I guess that was a long time ago, but it seemed to have worked when we opened a new school. But I'm talking about the whole feeder pattern boundary drawing process. I feel 46, 47, those are new schools. But the whole, I'm expecting a whole district-wide rezoning, not just these two schools.
Right, and I think that you've made it clear, and you're expecting the options to come from the district, and we already have, starting points already from the facilities master plan. And so what I'm hearing is that you're concerned about adding layers of bureaucracy or something, or layers of effort that aren't needed. And what I'm hearing the district saying is that they feel that hearing from the people who live in a particular neighborhood is important. And that's not a big community meeting, that's a small gathering of people at a particular location or something like that. So
Well, it would be a community meeting for 46 and 47, yes, because those are smaller. I mean, you're talking neighborhoods that are impacted by the new schools being constructed. What I'm saying is, in the past, we know what worked and what did not work. Okay, school boards drawing boundaries does not work. Okay, too many special interest groups. Building utilization committee did not work. Okay, when are we going to start learning from mistakes from the past?
yeah, no, I don't think this is,
I'm
we're
just,
going back to
I
this.
mean, I just know we don't know what's going to happen because we've never done it differently yet. So, again, I don't see, and people say, oh, someone's up at the microphone just to talk. I mean, I don't think that's fair. We have people that have things to say, and they're just not coming up to the microphone just to hear themselves talk. So, and they deserve answers. I've been at the microphone, and nobody listened. And what we need to show is we are listening. So I think we've learned from 2011, 2012, we don't want to do it that way again. And so when I see a district local committee, it bothers me. It's just,
All right.
it's too many
Let's see if
biases there.
who else has something to say. Have you had a turn already?
I have. I can wait.
Is there anybody who hasn't had a turn who would like to say something? Okay, go ahead then, Mrs.
Okay.
Wilson.
So a couple things. First of all, so I'm back to being confused again because I'm hearing Ms. Bailey say district-wide rezoning, and that is not what we have discussed at all. Am I wrong about that?
Well, yes, we actually have discussed district-wide rezoning on
Fall.
a long-term prospect.
Correct.
So this fall, the intent for boundaries would be 46, 47, and perhaps 2 or 3 hotspots that we know must be addressed as quickly as possible.
Okay, that was my understanding. So, a couple of things. I agree that we can start, I think we discussed this last time, that starting with the facilities master plan and the work that was done there with feeder patterns is a great place to start. I continue to believe that feeder patterns affect boundaries. I'm not saying it can't be done simultaneously, but the effect is if we don't do district-wide rezoning altogether, then the feeder pattern, but we do the feeder pattern optimization and get that in place, it's necessarily going to affect other boundaries that we draw in the future. So my point is that we're going to do a complete overhaul of feeder patterns anyway, and we're not going to do, at least not by this plan, district-wide rezoning this fall. And so it's the same, because the feeder patterns are going to be in place, and when we do complete the rezoning in stages, however we see that playing out, it's going to impact that rezoning that we do later down the road. So I don't see the difference. I really don't. I mean, I'm a very kind of linear thinking. If we do the feeder pattern and get those in place, then whatever rezoning we do in the future is necessarily going to be impacted by that. Whether we do it this fall, next spring, next fall, following spring, whenever it is, we're going to have the feeder patterns redone, and it's going to impact zoning whenever it is that we choose to do it. So I guess I don't see that I guess I don't see why we have to do them hand in hand, since we're not going to do it all hand in hand anyway. Does that make sense?
It does. Let me try another approach.
Okay.
Because if you remember when we spoke last week, we had feeder patterns going all the way out to April.
Yes.
Because we wanted to take plenty of time, make sure it was done right. You've asked that we accelerate that, which we have done. But, so there's two things at play. All of this is labor intensive. It's data analysis, it's work, it's planning, it's execution. And so that's why the original plan had boundaries being finished by January, which this plan still shows, and feeder patterns being pushed out beyond that to allow us the time to address boundaries this fall. In this revised plan, we have expanded the number of boundaries we could potentially do and compressed the feeder patterns. So I feel like we've addressed what the board asked us to do, and I hear what you're saying, Ms. Doss, saying that it conceivably, I mean, what I almost hear you saying, and I don't think you're saying this, is, well, why can't we just take that concept and adopt it in October or November?
No.
And so I didn't think that's what you were saying. That's what I'm hearing a little bit, though, because I'm trying to understand when else you would want us to, how we would change that, how would we detach them? Because they are running simultaneously. They are interdependent to a certain extent. But you're exactly right in that once we set feeder patterns, we pretty much know over the long term what the boundaries will have to be to accommodate that. So we want to get our feeder patterns right. But of course, growth patterns will affect that, and, various things over the coming years as we implement. We'll need to continue to do our work on the boundaries.
Okay. So, and I will say that what stands out as new to me is this review of data in December. So in my mind, there was no reason we couldn't get this done by November if we had our community dialogue meetings. I mean, I felt like there wasn't a lot of work to be done. If the district feels, the administration feels that we need to compare it to the new data in December, that's new information to me. So I will say tonight. So I understand that. My other comment would be, so I was part of the opening of the last new school that we had in number 45. I agree with cutting down on the bureaucracy. I was not in favor necessarily of the district-wide committee. I do think we have to address, and we talked about the dialogue at the workshop and how important we felt like the community dialogue, that it was actually dialogue. So I would agree that it needs to not be just someone at the microphone but I maybe see it a little differently, that one of the ways to achieve that is to allow those communities to form some type of committee to be heard. Because one of the things that happened in our community when that school was open is that many of them did not feel like, and it was probably because it was the boundaries committee that was in play, the building utilization committee that was involved in, that had less of the actual community members, the neighborhood community members. So I will say it doesn't matter to me how big or small those are. I think it would help to have people from the community, perhaps in a committee form or some form where they feel like they're being heard, in addition to the community dialogue meetings where there is actually dialogue taking place. And then finally, I wanted to point out, so we talk a lot about 46 and 47 while alluding to these extra things we're going to do. I noticed in DeYoung and Richter's contract that they only talk about 46 and 47.
I think, didn't we add another?
Up to three, that we can look at three within the scope of that work. And then the administration can identify others as we might see needing to be discussed as a part of a boundary change.
But outside the scope of the contract, isn't that right?
No.
Okay, so I must...
46 and 47 are named, but then we can well, there's two ways. We can add another within the contract, but we've also built contingency into the item if we need to go beyond that.
So I saw the contingency, but I probably would need you to point me to where that is in the contract, because I specifically noted that it didn't at least jump out at me at first glance. So I would want to be
On
sure.
page 8, and it says, I don't know if,
Of the board book?
no. Actually, I'm on page 8 of the contract, so,
Okay, let me get to it.
which is really page 9 because there's a cover sheet.
Okay, so I'll look at it.
Elementary school 46 and elementary school 47 and other boundaries. It doesn't define them.
This is a proposal. The contract will be through Jacobs, so this would serve as the proposal for the work. And it is, you're correct, on page 8 where it says prepare for community meetings, review local elementary community meeting results, assist superintendent to prepare recommendations for elementary school 46 and 47 and other boundaries.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at that. I just have one comment. This looks like piecemeal zoning. Again, are we not going to learn from the past? 46, 47, a few other boundaries. And for 200 plus K to DeJean Richter to do that. So I'm not blaming you for that. You just so happen to be up there. I feel like it's, I don't know, deja vu all over again. And I really don't want to have to be the person to say again and again, I told you so, when you put these committees together. Because Mr. Rosenthal and I know how that went when we were elected to the board and moved a neighborhood to the school that we knew that fit in their feeder pattern. So, again, I sometimes feel the committees hold the board hostage to some things versus the vetting. Because if I know it's been vetted, well, I'm okay. But if I feel like a local committee is steering, I'm not okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, Ms. Bailey. Let me address that because I do want to make sure that we're adequately conveying this the way this is going to work. We, as the administrative team, will put together the proposed boundaries. We will discuss that with the board. And then we would take it to what we're saying, what we're calling in here, the local school committees. But it's not, as you're envisioning, like what we did last year. It's more of, we're going to that committee with, here is a plan that we have discussed with the board that we believe is a viable plan. And in some cases, it may be one or two, depending on what the number of options that are available. And then that committee, a smaller committee, will be able to meet with us, give feedback, share their perspective of how that would interact in their community. And then that would give us opportunity to refine it, strengthen it, improve it, and then have a larger community meeting where everyone can come and hear and give feedback. And so it's not the committee driving it the way so much that I know your concern has been from the steering committee and the way we handled it last time. It's really more of a feedback loop that starts with us presenting to the board, then to a smaller community, and then a larger community. And so it's not it would not be, I don't think it would have the same level of I don't think the board would need to have the same level of concern that they're being held accountable for doing something that a committee developed the way that you've expressed you're concerned about.
Okay, but that's for 46 and 47. Again, though, I'm still going back to this, to me, it still looks like piecemeal zoning, which is what we've done over and over and over, and it's put everyone out of their feeder patterns that they were in originally. And I just think if you only look at 46, 47, and a few other things, just to wait to get some more schools built, it's just not a healthy way to do it.
I understand what you're saying, but I would have to tell you, it's not physically possible to redraw boundaries for the entire district at one time. And so that's why we put together a plan to start that work with the understanding that you can see in February, that we would then establish the long-term scope of work for the next year or two to determine the time frame for all of that.
I think,
So as the board turns over, so does the process, is what I see, too. I mean,
Well,
I don't
we
know, I just
defined
think
the
we're stuck in
process,
one
though,
mode.
in terms of asking for community engagement, reviewing demographics. We defined that in our policy and said what we.
again, like I said,
Mr. Rosenthal,
That's just-
what comments do you have?
I like the way you just kind of re-explained that. I think I feel a little better about that, knowing that you're going to come up with some proposals, bring it to us, and then just kind of check off with, a few community members, say, okay, that's fine, or you know what, you can't do this because of whatever that we don't know about.
There's a bridge.
Yeah, whatever. So I'm okay with that for 46 and 47. But here's what I predict, is once you start doing this feeder pattern stuff, some of these boundary changes are going to hit you in the face this fall. And to say, well, we're going to put that off, I think the rumors are going to start flying and people are going to start getting upset. And you're right. I think right now, I think we're in a tough spot because I do think it would be really tough to rezone the entire district, over the next 2 months, especially with the programs that are going to come into play and whatnot. But I guess if we can say by the end of the year, by January, at least we're putting the framework in place and people are going to know, okay, these feeder patterns changed. There's discussions centering around these things, but it may be a year or two. I don't know. I think it's going to get sticky.
Well, it is, because it's hard work.
I know.
But remember, like we talked about last week, there are going to be things that, like you said, pop out at us, that just smack us, and we'll have to say, yeah, we need to do this, but we don't have to say we have to do it in August of 2015. The whole intent of all of this work, the feeder patterns and the boundaries, except for 46 and 47, is to put a plan together that we enact over time. Some would be next fall, some would be 2 years out, some may even be 3 or 4 years out. But we want to be able to have a system where this community knows we have gone through this in a very methodical way, and it's not been a quick fix, put together kind of process.
Well, are we going to be prepared, though, by January, if some of these things do hit us in the face and really require some major shifts? Are we going to be prepared to do that?
Well, we have the capacity to do that if we feel like we need to. Again, that's why we believe this needs to run together. Because if we get to late October, early November and realize, this feeder pattern is going in this direction and it's going to require this boundary change, then that enables us to take that boundary, have a month or so to take it out, do what we need to do to work it with the community, and still bring it to the board in January.
So how does, let's say that happens, okay? There's a feeder pattern change, kind of like you and I discussed. And that sets up something over here and over here. I mean, there's just a chain reaction, Where does Richter get involved? Do we now have to start paying contingencies on that, or?
They're simply about facilitation at this point.
Right, so that could lead to increased facilitation, so
Within what we're asking you to approve tonight.
so that's within that.
That's our goal, yes.
So there would not be an additional cost for that?
Not at this point, no.
Okay.
We've built in a contingency to enable us to address some of those things.
Okay, so if feeder pattern A causes some large boundary change that may involve academies or something like that, that's built in with this? I mean, for
To a
tab?
certain extent. I mean, it depends on how big it gets. If it
Okay,
gets
well,
big-
that's what I'm asking.
But again, I mean, as we've told you before, and as we've written in the documents, our end game in all of this and using DeYoung and Richter is to build internal capacity. Right now, we don't have the bandwidth, the manpower to do all of this work, nor do we have the district systems in place. We can design systems, but DeYoung and Richter is helping us develop systems that are going to work for Fort Bend.
Okay.
And then over time, we aren't going to need external support. We'll be able to do this on our own.
Okay, so I'm okay with the way you describe things, because it's, those local committees now, the way you've described it, don't necessarily sound like an additional layer of bureaucracy, like they kind of did. You know, I think Jenny and I thought we're kind of thinking along the same lines there, because, you know, a bunch of us have seen it, and it is kind of scary to think that way. So I think I'm okay with that, but I just know that there are going to be other things that come out of this that we're going to have to deal with.
Well, actually, when I look at the scope of their work, it looks like DeJong is preparing the boundaries and the feeder, so.
Okay, so it's all included.
So it looks like that's what DeJong is doing.
And that will be some
So do we-
major
should
work.
we just
They'll be earning their
hire him or
money.
what? I mean, they're doing all that work, so they're going to do it twice. They're going to do feeder patterns, and then they're going to do boundaries. It's duplicating the process. 200K plus.
Do we have any other comments or discussion?
I have one last question. When are we going to identify the additional boundaries that we're going to be focused on this fall?
I think,
Did
Beth,
we-
isn't that one of the first meetings in October,
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay.
in September, October?
Determine.
And so
Oh, there it is, it's in September, determine schools to be impacted
Oh,
by
I see it,
boundary
I see it,
process.
okay. So that's going to happen pretty quickly. So it is our goal that if we tend to have a little bit of a domino effect in one of these areas, are we prepared to perhaps maybe even take that up in the spring? And perhaps that's something that the district might be ready to do without the help of an outside consultant? I mean, that is our goal, is what you stated, is for us to be able to move forward without paying a
I wasn't
consultant.
planning on the spring so much, but if the board is feeling sensitive to using them, then we can discuss that. But I'm not going to have any more help in March than I have today, and all the heavy lifting everyone is
Okay.
doing is significant. So
Okay.
that's really what's driving it, is everyone is working
Yes.
more than full-time jobs right now.
Well, and I guess when we go to vote on this, I just want everybody in the audience to know, we're actually just voting to approve DeJong Richter tonight. We're not approving feeders, we're not any of that. That was work to come. You saw the presentation on the timeline, so I hear your concerns out there. I just want you to know what we are actually voting on tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Bailey. Okay, do we have any other discussion? Are you ready to vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Rice.
You sure about that, Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Rice, for your affirmation. All right, then we have a motion to approve this amount of money for the feeder pattern, boundary planning, and community engagement. Please vote. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Moving on now to the schematic design of Elementary School 47. I believe we have a presentation.
My goal is that you should see one slide this evening.
Only one?
There was only two little things we changed, I think, two or three.
He's going to scroll to that slide right now, I can tell by the look on his face.
Scott Klaus with the SHW will be assisted by Max Cleaver to get to that slide right there.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you for having us back.
Thank you for coming back.
Absolutely. We did get your input at the last committee meeting, and we've made a few adjustments, and we'd like to share those with you tonight. There was a lot of discussion about the traffic that's going to be at this school because of all the walkers and the riders and all that. And so it was suggested by the board that we look at another drop-off for the pre-K and also trying to get more cars in queue to try to get them off the street. So what we've done, and we actually have some floor plan adjustments with this as well, but I think I can talk about it in general and you'll understand. We've added a loop here that's basically really didn't even add that much more paving because we combined it with a drive that we already had there for the fire lane, so that we have a couple of parking spaces, and we've moved the pre-K and the PPCD down to the end of the building so that parents can drop their kids off right there and then go, so they don't have to get stuck in that loop of traffic. The other thing that we've done is we've separated these drives. We've got a separate bus drive back here, as well as the separate parent drop-off. That both drop-offs now dump the kids into this area where we have that basically funnels into the covered canopy area. We did have a discussion with Riverstone yesterday about whether or not we could actually bring the buses down and around into this cul-de-sac. They weren't very excited about that. We'll continue to discuss that. The reason we had that discussion was we were trying to get the buses and the cars further away from each other. So we still have to have a traffic engineer take a look at this, but this is kind of our next step for the site plan. Does anybody have any questions?
Do we have any questions, Mr. Rice?
Yes. I think it's a beautiful school. I know you worked really hard. My question is this going to be a LEED certified school?
Yes, that is the intent.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, the question I have is, absolutely, last time also I raised my concern, because I live in the neighborhood, and the traffic congestion. Obviously, it is not a small elementary school. Mm-hmm. And I see that you accommodate many of our concerns into the new plan. I appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And also talking about the drop-off behind, you said the cul-de-sac, behind yes.
So you can't, we don't have a full survey yet, but this is, was taken from a utility plan. There's a cul-de-sac here with
Sure.
houses on each side, correct?
Okay, so is that going into a subdivision, and that's what you're saying?
No, it's a dead, these are all homes here.
Okay,
Am I answering your question?
yeah, that's all homes, right?
Mhm,
So
correct.
going through that
It does
subdivision?
not go through, currently does not go through.
Okay, okay.
But the buses would go through
Yeah.
right down its street.
Right. My question is that okay with the developer? It's okay with the?
We have asked the question and had not gotten positive feedback about that, which is understandable because they're not very excited about having the buses come down into that portion of the neighborhood. So
Okay.
we're just exploring it, but what you see in front of you is what the current plan is.
Right. But I always in favor of having maybe an option we could choose eventually if that is important, like when traffic really come in play, actually. You only feel it when it started the operation and how things goes. And once again, I really appreciate you included our concerns into especially the transportation area or picking up and dropping off locations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Board President, I just want to point out that you don't have a motion, although you've moved beyond the presentation into arguably deliberation.
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Do we have a motion, please? May we have a motion, please?
Madam President, I move to accept action item 11B as presented.
It would be 12B, I think is what you
12B.
mean, the schematic design.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mr. Rosenthal. Do we have further discussion?
Yeah.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Okay, at the risk of sounding like a buffoon, which I probably do anyway, I like thinking outside the box, and I was really a big fan of the Jetsons. And so has there ever been any thought of actually putting in like an elevated entrance? I know it sounds crazy, but, to elevate like a second entrance,
Just to split up the traffic flow.
Has anybody ever done that or thought about that? I mean,
It's done in arenas.
well, I know, it's done at Hobby Airport too, but,
Right,
has it ever been done at a school?
But not to my knowledge. And I think you're really trying to keep everybody, for the most part, particularly during the middle of the day, keep them going through the same door.
Yeah, you don't want them jumping off ramps
Right,
either,
so
but,
try to have one main central entry, yeah.
It's, again, just,
Window, Mom.
might as well have a little laugh, at my
Well, we
expense.
like outside-the-box thinking.
No more
That's
Jetsons. Or you.
All right. Do
Have
we
you seen those drivers? Can you imagine them going up a ramp?
Do we have any more discussion? Thank you, Mr. Klaus. All right, are we ready to vote then? Please vote. Motion passes. Our next item is the construction manager at risk for elementary school 47, Bartlett Calk. Do we have a motion?
Madam President, I move to accept action item 12C as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Bailey. Do we have discussion?
Yes.
Mr. Rice?
Mr. Cleaver, my question begins with elementary 46. Elementary 46, we bid that out a year ago, and it came in at 15 million. And then a couple of months ago, not sure exactly of the timeline, we passed a motion to approve a construction manager at risk for elementary 46 and allowed the superintendent to negotiate a contract not to exceed $18 million. You recall that?
Yes, sir.
So that was a 20% increase over the budget from a year ago. And arguably, the construction costs have risen a lot, but it didn't come in at 18 million. It came in, wasn't it over 20 million?
Sure.
So we had to come back to the board for approval on that. So we had at least a 33% increase over the original budget for that, and that was a construction manager at risk contract, was it not?
The current 46? Yes, sir, the
46.
current one is, yes,
So
sir.
was the contractor able to provide pre-construction services?
No, sir, because the construction drawings, construction documents already existed.
Oh, did we have any fee for pre-construction services on that contract?
I would have to go back and check. I don't have that in front of me right now.
Okay. Well, given that, my question is, what measures do you intend to take to ensure we do not have a repeat of this kind of cost escalation on elementary 47?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the market is going to decide what the price is, but what we're going to do as a district is we're going to work with our architect and we're going to work with the construction manager to make sure that whatever is drawn is actually constructible and constructed out of the proper materials and materials that are best value for Fort Bend County, Texas in this market. So we're going to work with our construction manager and our architect and our design and construction team to bring it in at the budget.
But of course, you're not going to get the guaranteed maximum price until after the drawings have been bid out.
That's my recommendation. Their districts do it different ways. Most public K-12 entities wait until very close to the end of CDs or actually wait until subcontractor bids are taken. Now, that is a district choice, and moving forward, we're going to have a lot of dialogue about the design and construction department starting next month with the audit and the management oversight. And so I think we need to have that dialogue about where we would take GMP. My recommendation, and I've talked to a lot of people, I still do not see an advantage of taking GMP prior to construction drawings being complete.
Yeah.
It could help schedule, it could help with our schedule, but that's the only absolutely affirmative point anybody's been able to share with me as to why you would do it ahead of, why you would take a GMP before construction drawings were complete.
Probably in this market, I would agree with you, but that's why I'm not sure it's the right procurement method. But here's my other question. If elementary 46 came in at over $200 a square foot, why do we think elementary 47, which will bid, some months from now, will come in at $187 a square foot?
Well, we actually have an advantage building larger schools because our expensive spaces are what I would call the wet areas, the kitchen, the restrooms, things that have a lot of plumbing associated with it. When you build more classrooms and divide that square footage into that more expensive space, it tends to drive the cost down.
It's 20,000 square feet more.
The
46, right?
current building is designed right now at 157,800.
Oh, 157.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's your recommendation that we should proceed with this?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Do we have additional questions or comments? I have a question. When we have, this is the second contract we'll have with Bartlett Cock, and is there any advantage to that? Why would we have two contracts with the same people? Is there advantage to that, like economies of scale or something, or is it?
No, ma'am, these were two totally separate solicitations, and they came out, scored the highest in the scoring matrix.
Okay. Is there concern of us putting all our eggs in one basket, all with one firm? Is that something that gets considered at all?
I don't see that with these two elementary schools, no, ma'am. I know the concept that you're talking about, but I think in this market it actually gives us a little more buy-in, and anecdotally the word or the phrase is one throat to choke when something goes wrong.
Well, let's hope we're not choking any throats.
No, ma'am, it's just anecdotally.
Okay. I think I'll stop this line of conversation.
As he says, sitting next to a lawyer.
All right.
Well, with that said, our attorneys have helped greatly with these contracts, and they have been with us every step of the way, helping us through the contract language.
All right. Well, thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right. Then we're ready to vote. Please vote. Thank you. The motion passes. We are on to the resolution approving the 2014 tax year tax roll, which I'm scrolling to at this moment, which is on page 108. Do we have a motion? Mrs. Tosse.
Madam President, I move to approve action item 12D as presented.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Tossan for the tax roll based on the certified 2014 values. Do we have any discussion or questions? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. Our next item is the tax rate for the 2014 tax year. Mr. Rice?
Madam President, I move that the property tax rate be increased by the adoption of a tax rate of $1.34, which is effectively a 3.72% increase in the tax rate.
Second.
Do we have discussion?
Yes, Mr. Bassett. Actually, our tax rate of $1.34 has not changed. So when we say we have a 3.72% increase in the tax rate, is that because of the increasing revenue on the tax rolls?
Yes, sir.
The new development plus the increasing values of existing development?
Yes, sir, that's exactly right, and this is a calculation that comes from the truth in taxation guidelines that we have to follow whenever we publish, but you're correct that the tax rate will remain the same at
Okay.
1.34, and the language in the motion that you read is required by statute.
Thank you.
And that also include the price increase for the properties, I assume?
Yes,
Both new properties and
new and current,
current?
new and existing.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions or comments? Hearing none, please vote. Thank you very much. And our next item tonight is the Audit Committee's recommendation to engage Gibson Consulting.
Madam President, I move to approve action item 12F as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Bailey. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. And that concludes our action items. So now, Dr. Dupree, we're on to review future board meeting agenda items.
Yes, ma'am. We meet again next Monday night to review the superintendent evaluation instrument and prepare for the superintendent's summative evaluation on October the 6th. In October, we have several major items. We have the board management oversight report on design and construction. We also have an annual first hearing, that's our Financial Integrity Rating System of Texas report on October the 20th. And we're also going to bring forth some instructional technology planning information for the board. We'll also, at some point in either October or November, ask the board to approve the superintendent's evaluation instrument. And we also have a policy that we've developed in response to the recent other additional work on capital planning, where we're going to ask the board to approve a policy CT local on capital planning, and perhaps at some point in October or November appoint an internal auditor. November, we come back then with board management oversight of curriculum and instruction department and additional update on House Bill 5 implementation, including CTE and academies, along with recommendations on how to address some of the concerns regarding academies at this point. And as Dr. Garcia mentioned earlier, we're going to bring forth annual college board information. That's the SAT, PSAT, all that good information for the board and AP testing. And then in December, we'll also want to talk to the board about annual National Clearinghouse update. That has to do with more of our longitudinal data about where students go to school, how long they stay, and kind of where they go after they leave Fort Bend ISD. And that's really the main information. We've discussed the rest of this evening. Is there any feedback the board would have about any other items?
Any other thoughts? I have a question about the CT local capital planning policy. If we have some feedback or input or suggestions on that, should we handle that if we're going to talk about that next month?
Just feel free, we provided you that previously. Just feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call to talk about any feedback you have on it, and we can amend it appropriately before it comes before the board.
Okay, so we can all send our changes via email and he can compile that.
But we will do it on the workshop and meeting, so we'll have an opportunity to dialogue about it as well.
Right. I just thought the draft was kind of wordy, so I was thinking to prune it down a little bit. My opinion. Okay, do we have any other comments on the calendar or the upcoming meeting items? Okay, then we are ready to adjourn.
Madam President, I motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.